Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Hirsch. I'm Vice President for Academic and Student Success here at the college, and I want to welcome everyone to this year's Lindback Lecture. This is an exciting time that we look forward to every year. Our Lindback Lectures celebrate the innovative educators and ideas that motivate students and encourage discussion about new and exciting academic practices. Recognizing excellence in teaching, the Lindback Award has been presented to outstanding faculty in the greater Philadelphia area since 1961. The college is proud to be one of 52 colleges and universities that participate in the program. Helping students discover their strengths and achieve their goals is a rewarding and challenging task, and all of us at the college applaud the efforts of our Lindback winners for their dedication and creativity. And I'm really pleased to see some former Lindback recipients, and I want to embarrass them and ask them to stand so we can applaud them. We thank them for their continued work, and for some, wish them well in their continued retirement. So let's move forward now. Our 2018 Lindback Award winner is Joe Kenyon, is an associate professor of English who has taught at the college since 2005. Joe earned his BS in education and an MA in English from Slippery Rock University. Previously, he was a member of community college faculties in Michigan, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and we're pleased that you landed here. In addition to teaching, he's a writer, having published poetry and fiction in numerous literary journals. His novel, All the Living and the Dead, was published in 2016. That's a provocative title. I'm trying to sell it.
It's a zombie.
Two of his poems, Late One Icelandic Afternoon and Timescape, were most recently published in the Folded Word Journal in 3-line poetry. Please join me in welcoming our 2018 Lindback Award recipient, Joe Kenyon.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome. All right. Good afternoon, colleagues, students, family, friends. I want to open this lecture by thanking the people who made it possible. To the Lindback trustees for their generous gift of supporting education in the Delaware Valley. To the Lindback Selection Committee. To our hosts, Dr. Samuel Hirsch and Dr. Judy Gay. To my supportive colleagues from the English department, any number of whom could and maybe should be standing here delivering this lecture today. And finally, to Natalie Price, who has worked so hard behind the scenes to make this day special. Thank you, Natalie. This is my 30th year teaching at a community college, but this is my 32nd year in affiliation with the community colleges. I began my college career as a student enrolled in a community college from 1981 to 1983. Largely due to the work of President Obama and Dr. Jill Biden, community colleges are more respected today than when I attended Butler County Community College, or BC3, on the western side of the state. At that time, your status was linked to the college you attended. The creme de la creme went to Carnegie Mellon or University of Pittsburgh. Next came the private colleges, Duquesne, La Roche, Carlow. Those who wanted specialty educations went to Robert Morris College for Business or the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. Teetering on the edge of respectability were the state colleges, Slippery Rock, Edinburgh, and Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And finally, the bottom of the academic barrel, only a crack away from seeping out into the abyss left by the closing of the steel mills, went to BC3. Or, as it was widely known by its other nickname at the time, Butler County Clown College. Not exactly the place one would expect to find an academic trajectory, but as usually happens, one teacher made a difference. I was enrolled in a survey course called Survey of British Literature. Now today, a course like that is split into 2, maybe 3 different classes. But this was one 15-week course from Anglo-Saxon poetry to Philip Larkin. In walked Dr. Ray McGrath, 5'1", if you counted her bouffant, 5'6". She put down her stack of books, gave the room a long, slow look, and then said, "Would the idiots in here please raise their hands?" No one moved. She nodded and said, "Fine. If no one in here is an idiot, I'm not going to treat you like you are." I don't want to go into the rigor of the course, except to say that Dr. McGrath required a 15 to 20-page research paper on one of the works that she provided on a list. I chose The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. True, I loved the poem from the moment I saw it, but I also was intrigued by the footnotes. So, in one of those footnotes, they mention a book called From Ritual to Romance by Jessie Weston. Thinking that this book might be important for my research, I traipsed off to the Butler County Community College library to find a book that had no shot of being there. The book was published in 1920. It is not known for general scholarship. And it was tied to only one footnote in one poem taught in one course at the college. But there it was, in hardback, no less. I read it and I was hooked. Weston's book took me to The Golden Bough, another book that shouldn't have been there but was in the BC3 library. We came to find out that Dr. McGrath was a founding faculty member who was in charge of stocking the library, and so she stocked them for her books. After I left BC3, I went to Slippery Rock. I talked to one of my other professors who said, "I have a scholar for you that you might like, Joseph Campbell." And she introduced me to his first scholarly work, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's in that work that Campbell lays out his theory of the monomyth, the unconscious mythological underpinning of each person's journey through life. At the time, Campbell's theory struck me as just a little bit out there, but I thought to myself, this monomyth thing could really be interesting if used in writing fiction. It wasn't until years later that I realized the monomyth playing out in my teaching, in my life, and in the academic lives of my students. Now, depending on how you break it up, the monomyth consists of 12 to 26 steps. Okay? Some of you may see 11 steps here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Can anybody tell me what the 12th step is? Well, we went around the circle to return. That's 11. Back to the call of adventure. Campbell's theory is based that in order to complete one journey, you have to embark on another. And that is the nature of the monomyth. Now, have no fear, folks. I am not going to go through all 12 or 26 steps of this thing. For today's presentation, I've condensed it down to 5 steps, the 5 most crucial to teaching and learning. Step 1, a restless nature. Campbell describes what he calls the call to adventure as an impulse or an urge to step out of our comfort zones and go off toward the unknown, to find something that our present circumstances, no matter how pleasant, aren't meeting. We are unfulfilled. We need a challenge. And so off we go to look for something that we don't know what, and we think we're going to be fine, but we're not really sure. And consciously or subconsciously, we understand we even could fail. Doesn't that describe our students at CCP? They come to CCP because they feel they should, or they need a degree, or it's the next step. But they don't know what lies ahead. And that's an important point. Maybe you've taught English 101 or Math 118 100 times, but for the student sitting in front of you, it's her first time. You understand the material you're teaching in an introductory course and how that's going to play out at the next level, but the student doesn't. The student has, as Campbell described, entered the forest at a point that he himself had chosen, where it was darkest and where there was no path. Our term for course sequences here at CCP, guided pathways, is comforting and superficially useful, but it can't cover the fact that once in the classroom, our students get lost or sent off on trajectories that they or we can't anticipate. We have to react to the individual student who's reacting to his or her individual situation in order to get the student back on the path, the student's path, the one he or she has chosen. Let me give you a story to illustrate this. When I was serving as the interim associate chair of the English department, a female student was having a disciplinary problem with a male student. So she sent him to talk to me. The student had recently been released from prison. He told me how he wanted an education, but the teacher and the students were disrespecting him in a variety of ways, and he just wasn't going to take that. I explained about the classroom dynamic, how it worked, why the teacher was saying the things she was, and explaining these things, but it wasn't getting through. Then this student let loose on me. I was disrespecting him too, and he was telling me this in very, shall we say, unacademic language. Finally, I got the point. I was speaking to this guy as if he had as much knowledge about college as I did. But this student was lost in the oaks, and I was telling him to turn right at the cactus. So I asked the student a question. Tell me what it was like when you first went inside. He launched right in about how, even though he heard stories, he wasn't prepared for prison. He was scared. He thought he was tough from the street, knew the rules of the street, but he got into the inside, he realized there were new rules. I asked him how he adjusted. And he told me he watched, he listened, he imitated the other prisoners. And finally, when the time came, he proved himself. I told him he was smart, and that even though he'd heard about college, he wasn't yet prepared for the experience. He had to adjust to it. And like the rules of the street didn't apply to prison, the rules of prison didn't apply to college. He had to learn new rules, new ways to adapt. And even if he doesn't pass the class, he would learn how to be a better student, and eventually he would prove himself. The students who sit in our classes, the students who pass us in the halls, they're following that call to adventure. They're looking for something they need in a place that they don't find nearly as familiar or comfortable as we do. If we're to be effective teachers, we have to recognize that and approach them from that standpoint. Pull back a branch and listen to what they're really saying to us. We complain as professors, the students spend so much time on their phones, but that's where they're comfortable. That's their connection to a bit of normality in an intense and wild environment they could find here. On that note, we have to challenge them academically, but never personally. If we quash that questing spirit, we fail them. Not academically, sometimes that's part of the journey. But by fail, I mean when they give up and turn back because we somehow didn't recognize their restless nature to begin with, we fail them. And we fail ourselves. And so much is lost in that failing. Step 2 is challenging authority. In the monomyth, the hero must get past what's called the threshold guardians. those things that hold us back. In terms of living, that means breaking with the status quo, the circumstance that is comfortable but unfulfilling, and overcome the voices of the naysayers. Those who tell the hero no, or tell the hero to keep living the right way, meaning their way, not the hero's. The challenge to that authority is often announced with a question. I want you to look at that word for a moment. What word do you see inside of it? Quest. The quest begins with a question. Now, many of the teachers in this room employ the Socratic method, asking students a line of questions designed to lead them to answers or insights about the material we're teaching them. But let's turn that around for a minute. We as teachers are the authority in the classroom, but this part of the monomyth isn't just about the questions we ask the students. It's also about the questions they ask us. It is logical to assume that if the seeker breaks the status quo, then the status quo will change. As teachers, we enter the room with a lesson, a plan, a roadmap, but we must be open to student questions or an insight that can change that plan in the moment. And we have to have the courage to shift gears if it's for the benefit of the entire class. We have to be open to being challenged by students. Otherwise, we become caricatures. Mr. Garvey from the Key and Peele skits, or Nietzsche's dragon from Thus Spake Zarathustra, emblazoned with the thou shalt scales. And more importantly, we miss the chance to inject the class with a vibe that can lead to deeper interest and deeper learning, all in the name of staying on track. A few semesters ago, I was teaching a 205 class. That's creative writing, the introductory course. We had just finished covering fiction writing. And as a wrap-up, I passed around index cards to the students, and I asked them to write one question they still had about fiction writing. I collected the cards, and I began reading the questions aloud so the class could answer them or we could discuss them. One student who had taken a composition class with me, as well as the creative writing class, asked this question: why do you teach writing differently in this class than you did in 102? Obviously, it wasn't a question the class could answer. Another student chimed in, yeah, I noticed that too. The rules for writing are different in this class than 101. Two responses came to me. One that I gave the class and one that I didn't. The answer I gave was the academic answer, the safe answer. Audience and purpose. Academic writing is a different kind of writing. If a writer wants to create an entire short story in sentence fragments, the reader's going to follow because the reader trusts where the writer's taking that reader. However, turn in a research paper written all in sentence fragments, and the result isn't going to be as good. There was a general chuckle in the room, and I moved on to the next question. But I glanced at the student who asked that. Now, I knew the student well enough to know that she understood the basic tenet, you've got to learn the rules before you can break the rules. She was asking me something deeper about the nature of writing itself, and I didn't provide it. Her expression dulled, and as I checked in with her a couple of times during the rest of the class, I saw that she was paying attention with her head, but no longer with her heart. The answer I didn't give, the risky answer, the writer's answer, was, I don't know. I hadn't thought more deeply about it. Imagine if I had given that answer, I don't know, and taken the conversation off in a direction that was alien. Imagine if I had had the gumption not only to risk vulnerability and say, let's answer that together. Let's see if we can figure that out. I could have still covered audience and purpose without quelling all the possible ways that the conversation could have gone. The fruits of such a conversation were endless, as was the risk of being asked another question I didn't know the answer to, or I couldn't foresee, or I couldn't control. I wasn't willing to risk it. After the class, I walked out feeling like I had a scale on my chest that read, "Thou shalt listen to me." And I felt like I robbed the class of a really good learning experience because I wasn't willing to take the risk. Yet it's in the risk, both the students and the teachers, where learning can take off. The transformative power of the classroom is unlike any experience outside of it. The line bears repeating. The transformative power of the classroom is unlike any experience outside of it. But that transformative power has to be a two-way street. The classroom needs to be a place where the student must feel free to challenge us as much as we challenge them. Because in the monomyth, they aren't the only ones being transformed. They aren't the only ones learning. And if they are, the learning quotient in that room is way too little than it needs or should be. This is uncomfortable for us as teachers, but it's our call to the adventure. Step 3 is the Sybil. The third step is where the hero meets a helper, a guide, or a mentor. The title of the Sybil means oracle or prophetess, and it comes from the Aeneid, where the Sybil of Cumae guides Aeneas in his quest to enter the underworld. No one gets anywhere in life or in college by themselves. I wouldn't be standing here today if not for many people who are willing to give me advice and point me in a direction. Some of them are in the room right now, and I can't thank them enough for being generous, wise, and forthright. I'm fond of the adage, every moment is a teaching moment, because it reminds us that teaching is not something we do 12 or 15 hours a week. It starts on the first day of the term and it ends on the last day. It's the informal conversation in the hallway or on the subway. It's answering student email as frequently as possible. It's jumping into an online discussion. It's grading papers and tests not as a chore, but as an extension of the discussion in the classroom. I know the main complaint from professors about commenting on student papers. Students never read the comments. There's some validity to that. But many students do read the comments. And I guarantee you, the majority of students notice that there are comments. They also notice that there aren't. Many, if not most students, don't expect us to be Sybils. But that isn't the point. They hope we will be. Yes, students can be nonchalant about our classes. They can look at their phones rather than the board. They can forget or ignore reading assignments. But still, they hope for us to be Sybils, to engage them, to show them that we care and that we believe deep down they care too. Now, I don't say this in some Pollyanna, naive way, like I can walk into a room and wave my magic chalk and everybody's inspired and engaged. Look at this picture closely if you can see it. If you're not familiar with it, it's a still from the movie Dead Poets Society. At the point where the teacher, played by Robin Williams, is being forced out of the room because of some things that went on, and the students whom he inspired are trying to let him know that he changed their lives. But I want you to notice something. Not all the students are standing. These three here, they look pained not to be standing, like they want to be, but they can't break with authority. They can't stand up. They've got to sit there because they were told they had to sit there. Some of the other students through here look like they couldn't care less. They don't want to stand. The teacher was crazy. All right? I mean, this whack job was out there doing all kinds of things, and they didn't take him seriously. He'd get him out of the room. The most important one is this student right here. This student, the entire movie, made fun of the teacher, acted like he couldn't care less, basically joked about things and treated the whole class as a joke. But guess what? He's standing. My point is this. We don't get to choose whom we inspire. We don't get to choose to whom we are a Sybil. We may never know. But if we go into the classroom honestly, engage students with our own enthusiasm for the subject and for our love of it, if we treat them all equally and fairly, if we challenge and support them, and be genuine, then we open the door for them to walk through. I'm teaching a class this semester in which every student in the room is female. Near the beginning of the semester, one of the students asked me if I felt weird being the only guy in the room. I shrugged and said, "You each have a brain. That's all I care about." I noted the moment because of the fleeting expressions that went across the students' faces, ranging from humorous to surprised to wow, that's right. If we want our students to learn, to be guided by us, we have to earn it. This is Philly, and being genuine is about as important as knowing what we're doing. It can't matter to us if the students are male or female, black or white, what their home culture is, what their politics are, what their age is. What does matter is that we accept that they have a brain and they came to use it. And it's our job to engage that brain. Open the door so they know they're welcome to walk through it or not. It's their choice, not ours. Step 4, meeting the challenge. Now, this fourth stage is where the hero has to take on the challenge. In the myth, it's where the hero faces the ultimate test. Sir Gawain matching up with the Green Knight, or for example, or Psyche completing one of the innumerable tasks given to her by Aphrodite. Campbell calls this the abyss. For the student, it's when they meet that point where they can no longer just slide by. It's the point where they have to step up or fail. Now, I'm not strictly talking about failing a class, although that could be involved. But the challenge is deeper than that. Simply put, it's a challenge that tests their mettle. I said the classroom is a transformative power. And this is the point where the transformation happens. The challenge is internal and psychological, but it has external and very real consequences. And students' initial answers to this challenge come in many different guises, but it's usually resistance. It could be in protest phrases such as, "That's not the way I learned it," or "I got all A's in high school in this subject, English, math, science, whatever," or "I don't know how to write an analysis." It could be in the question, "What can I do to improve my grade?" And it could also be in reaching for a phone or trying to put their head down on a desk. Since the mid-1990s and the arrival of the internet, we've been living in a time of chaos, a time when technology is changing the very face of the way we live, destroying some traditional ways of life and opening up new ones. While we exist in this time of change, nothing is settled. So in steps Madison Avenue and corporate America to tell us the advertising and the messages of what we need, how we should feel, what we should have. One of those traditional ways of life that's kind of in the rearview mirror right now is going and getting a good job without furthering your education. As I said, I grew up near Pittsburgh in a steel town, and I had many friends and family who earned really good livings going to the steel mill with only a high school education. If they weren't inclined toward college, they had another path, another way. It's not so today. Students have only one option for getting ahead in the world, and that's more education. For the student who's educationally inclined, this is fine, but even that student's still going to be tested, have a crisis of confidence at some point. And what about the student for whom education isn't easy or doesn't come easily? That group comprises a large number of our students. What challenges does that student face, and how often? There's an old joke. How do you frighten a writer with words? We have a few writers in here today. Okay? Now, you want to frighten someone inclined toward math or science? For the student who isn't educationally inclined, this is what class is like every day. Again, a bit of empathy is called for here, even as we're pushing them toward that abyss. I tell all my composition students that I understand their pain and their fear, because I remember taking algebra. But I don't lower my standards or change my requirements. Instead, I lay out the process step by step. I encourage them to trust themselves that they can follow this process. But they still need to step into that abyss themselves. All I can do is set them on the course and then wait on the other side where they can see me. I push my creative writers to proclaim themselves as writers, even as I discuss my own reservations about that label. I insist that my current portfolio development class jump into the abyss by exposing their egos to the rejections from the publishing world. And I also insist that they add writer to the profession line on their taxes. Seen in this light, they meet our challenge. And finally, step 5, transformation. The final stage for our purposes is described by Campbell as passing through the challenge. Think about that for a second. Passing through the challenge. The phrase is brilliant because in the monomyth, the value is not in winning or losing. It's in learning from the journey. There's a famous story about young Ernest Hemingway when he was a reporter in Switzerland. His wife was back in Paris. She had recovered from an illness, and she was going to join him there. So she packed the stories, the Jack Adams stories he was working on, in a valise, and she also packed the carbons in the same valise. When that valise disappeared from a Parisian train station, Hemingway wasn't able to reproduce the stories. He wrote more Jack Adams stories. He wrote better Jack Adams stories. What is valued is meeting the challenge as a lesson learned, the way we change, the way we recalibrate and make ourselves ready for the next challenge. Education is transformation, but let's not get a big head about that. We don't transform students. We provide the vehicle, but they transform themselves or not. And if we're going to prep the ground so they can grow and transform, we have to transform ourselves, remake our teaching selves, embark on that call to adventure when it comes to what we do in the classroom, how we do it, what materials we choose to use, and how we interact with students whose viewpoints grow less and less like ours every year. That's difficult to do, folks, but we have help. We have Sybils. When I was a brand new full-time instructor at Cumberland County College in New Jersey, I had a particularly bad semester. I was doing the same thing I had done as an adjunct in other colleges, only nothing was going right. On top of that, I was suffering through a terribly long fallow period in my own writing and starting to wonder if I hadn't been deluding myself about this being a writer business. About halfway through the semester, I began to reread the Cornish trilogy, 3 novels by one of my touchstone authors, Robertson Davies, in the hopes of finding some inspiration and maybe a little bit of comfort. I hadn't figured out the issue with the class. My writing was still pretty wonky, but the books buoyed me to a degree that when the semester ended in December, I wrote Robertson Davies a card in care of his publisher, telling him how much I appreciated his books, getting me through a period when I felt weary and cold. Over the break, I came home to find an envelope from the University of Toronto, where Davies was master of Massey College, the graduate college there. Not only was I stunned that the great novelist had written me back, but one of the passages in his letter helped me find the root of the problem I was experiencing in the classroom. Davies wrote this: "I was happy to hear from you and to know that my books have given you pleasure. You say that this sometimes happened when you were weary or cold. I know exactly what you mean, because the work of the teacher is often dispiriting and seemingly ineffective. And I think that when you grow older, you will be astonished at the number of students who remember something you said, and that at some point you rouse them to an effort they would not otherwise have made." At some point, you rouse them to an effort they would not otherwise have made. This line brought me to two conclusions. First, how could I rouse my students to an effort if I kept teaching the same things in the same way? Yes, our students are changing. Yes, the times are changing. This is our challenge as teachers. Am I willing to meet it? Am I willing to step into the abyss, seek out new Sybils? Didn't I have to rouse myself before I could rouse anybody else? And second, it dawned on me that the job of teaching wasn't about me at all. It had very little, in fact, to do with Joe Kenyon, sage on the stage or flop on the hop. It was about the students, the effort they made, the path they chose to take through the monomyth. Beth Kephart, who teaches memoir and fiction at Penn, sums up this point. She writes, "I became a teacher again, a teacher who finally understood that there's only so much you can teach. The excellence lives in the students. The excellence alone is theirs to give." The joy of teaching comes in knowing that I've been privileged to enter the forest again and again with my students, to help them find their paths, and to be the recipient of their excellence. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now it's your turn to enter the abyss. Questions? Anybody have questions? No? We want more food. There's a question over there. Can you hand it to Ellie, please? Ellie, right here. Anybody want one over here?
Thank you, Joe. But I did have a question.
Yeah.
I love Joseph Campbell. I loved him in the series of TV programs, Ornament.
Right.
How do you feel? Do you feel myth is a good instrument in teaching? Because I know I've used it, and sometimes my students have already been exposed to it, but sometimes they haven't. Do you feel it's a good instrument in teaching, a good way of getting students interested in other areas?
Do I feel myth is a good instrument for teaching? Yes and no. Yes, because myth encompasses so much, and from all of us. I mean, at one time I was teaching a class of nursing students, and I gave them some myths to read, and it really helped them understand something about human interaction and healing. But that's me. My no is, if myth isn't your thing, you shouldn't use it to teach. You've got to use what you can translate to students, because that's what this is all about. The materials in the class is about translation. Do the students learn the lesson? So myth is really important as far as me, because I'm so steeped in it, I can use it. But if it's not what you're into, I wouldn't recommend everybody running out and reading The Hero of the Thousand Faces. It's a pretty dense book, okay? But there's got to be something that makes you say, I can use this to translate. I can get students to understand what I'm teaching by using this or that material. So yes, I personally think it's fantastic. I know a lot of teachers use it, as you do. And it is applicable in so many different ways. It's very, malleable in that way. But if it's not your thing, I wouldn't try it. New one. This is from a student in my writing class, so I'm going to guess it might be about writing.
Hi, Kenyon.
Hello, new one.
It's not really a question, but I think on behalf of all the all-female students in your current writing class, we're just really freaking proud of you. I'm glad we got to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the back?
So, Joe, I have to say, what you said was wonderful, and something that really struck me was early on, you talking about the way that we can't know what students get from our teaching, and that in some ways, I guess what I want to say is, do you think there are certain qualities that students get that can't actually be measured in a quantifiable way that we should somehow still appreciate?
I'm going to
Question, I know.
no, I'm going to say that probably, and the question is do students get something that can't be measured in a quantifiable way in our classes? And I'm going to say a good deal, because we don't know why students are in the room. And okay, so I'm lucky. I'm teaching a wonderful portfolio development class right now. Everybody's interested in writing. But, in a 101 class, a general introductory course, we're happy if there's a couple of people who are really interested in English 101 or Math 118 or something like that. But students come, as I said, for different reasons. And if you think about it, I'm going to ask all the teachers here to think back in their memory, wasn't it something that maybe wasn't even related to the course that a teacher said to you that put you on a certain path or made you say, wow, I want to do that? It was that kind of thing. And so I'd say we have to give grades. And if you stuck my feet to the fire and asked me if I think all colleges should be giving A, B, C, D grades or pass-fail grades, you probably wouldn't like my answer. But those things tell us the student's product and how the student works. But I think a lot more has to go on in the classroom that they get. And it does with all of us. Feel free to disagree with that. Stephanie? And then Diane?
So thinking about the quest of you as a teacher, thank you. Thinking about your own quest as a teacher, as an educator, you talked a little bit about what put you on that path, but I'm just wondering if you think there's something that either you went to, or maybe just people who become educators in general go through that. I guess, where do we learn to maybe not want to expose our vulnerabilities? Right, you were asked a question, there was an answer that you could have given and you didn't. Where do you think why do we get that armor?
Well, I think it comes to, we become teachers. It's kind of like it's a light comes down and you're now a teacher. You graduate and you're a teacher. And suddenly you're in front of a room, in front of a group of people. And I can tell you the moment I realized I was a teacher and I felt that, I was teaching grammar. And realize as I'm explaining on the board and trying to get into diagramming that I really didn't think I knew one thing about what I was talking about. Because I wasn't a great student. I was one of those students who school was fine, school was fun, but I wanted to write. And so, you realize at some point, oh my gosh, suddenly they're looking at me. You've got 20 students looking at you like you know what you're doing. And you got to be able to get somewhat protective of that. And I think as new teachers, we do that. Then as we get, further along, we tend not to. We open up a little bit, but we develop that early. And even then, some folks do open, some folks don't. And there are questions I get asked in class that I'm sitting there thinking, should I say this? Should I not? Do I really go there? Do I don't go there? And, you take that risk, but you have to be listening to the students. and differentiate what's a student asking a question is trying to take you off track because they don't want to talk anymore about comma splices, and a student who's asking a question because it's a deeper thing. And in the example I gave you, I missed it. I missed it. I misjudged it. And when you do that, you feel terrible. Like, wow, that could have been a really good class, and I blew it. They didn't, I did. So I think we start that early, and it takes a lot to break out of that. Diane?
Yes, in my department, English department at least, we frequently hear disparaging comments from each other. That so-and-so has been teaching that book for 4 years or 3 years or whatever. And my question to you is, in your opinion, is there anything intrinsically wrong? As long as you yourself remain passionate about a work, you keep finding more in it, more resonance, and even new assignments from it, in teaching the same work 3, 4, 5 semesters in a row.
No, I would never presume to comment on somebody else teaching, what they're teaching. As long you answered your own question. The caveat is as long as they remain passionate and can do it, because as I said, they might be teaching the book for the 4th time, but that student's hearing it for the 1st time. It's the professor, and I had a professor like this in college, and I'm guessing some of you did as well, who comes in with the yellowed notes that have been using the same for the last 15 years, and stood there and taught it like this, and this is how it was, and read it like that. And you know, you're sitting there thinking, I could read it or read to us out of the book and that kind of thing. A classroom is a living thing, and it's about enthusiasm, okay? And in a sense, you know, students are there and they're looking at us, and if we're sitting up here like, okay, let me mail this in, they're not going to learn much. But if we're engaged and excited, that's the key. Then they can feel that engagement and excitement. And you know, there are books I think I could teach for 5 years, but I don't, because I'm too afraid I would get bored. And if once I get bored, then it's over for the class, because now it's just terrible.
Joe?
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Just go ahead.
I'm curious about something that you have mentioned in different areas. So one is that you're listening to the students, you're understanding all of their challenges, their life challenges, their journey, their meeting challenges, their transformation. But I'm curious how your comment about the all-women class and how they all just have a brain. Well, they all have a brain.
They all have a brain. Right.
So I'm curious what you would say about the challenges that our students meet and the uniqueness, because I know you also mentioned that. The uniqueness of each individual and the journey that they're going through. How do you balance that out, understanding that yes, each student does have a brain and has the ability and capability, while at the same time, and I'll use my words, understanding their difference and understanding their uniqueness?
Okay, how you understand a student's uniqueness in the class is you might note that. I mean, as a human being, we might note that you know, I'm the only person in the room. I don't think I really realized that for the first couple of class sessions until actually Madison pointed that out. But we have to avoid pigeonholing students. And this becomes a problem after a long time. I mean, as I said, I've been doing this for 30 years. And it's easy to say, oh, okay, well, all right, I'm going to use this class again because they're sitting right here. There's 10 of them, they're writers, they all have to love writing. Well, on any given day, some of them might hate writing because writing's hard. And so they might not be as engaged or whatever. Or I don't know the backgrounds of my students. I never look at the old grades. So you have to assume they're people, and they are there for individual reasons. And as you would any other human being, they're going to clue you in. They're going to say something, okay? We know from being in a classroom. Have you ever been in a classroom where every student didn't want to be there? They make it known. They know, not disrespectfully, but they're just sitting there, you know, looking around. And so you have to try to understand what they're doing to a degree. You still got to get through the material. And eventually there are times you have to say, okay, gang, I know it's 75 degrees out there and it's, you know, late March, but you know what? We do have to read this text and understand it. So, you know, pony up and get into it. But you can do that in a way also after the class. And this is my point about teaching doesn't just happen in the classroom. If you notice a student who's not doing very well, you take them aside after class or you send them an email later and say, hey, you haven't turned in the last 3 assignments and you were really good all semester. Is there a problem? Can I help you with something? And I think understanding that we're all human beings in that room means we have to be able to give each other a little bit of slack sometimes, or at least notice that.
I think there's one thing missing.
Okay, I'm sure there's many.
I learned when I was teaching many years ago the American presidency.
Okay.
And that sometimes is quite often lost in a community college. It is the content of the course.
Mm-hmm.
When students started responding to me,
Mm-hmm.
their first response was, "You really love this stuff, don't you? You
And
really do."
And they say it with that same shock and surprise in their voice, like who in their right mind would love this?
So, to me, the teacher's dedication to the content, the
Mm-hmm.
excitement about the content, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
in my case, it's political science. How does that fit into the teacher-student relation?
I think it's vital because the students go through 3 stages, right? They look at us and they say, my gosh, how's this guy getting excited about this? Okay. Then they say, what am I missing? He's excited. A couple other people are excited. Like, they don't want to be left out. Okay. And then eventually they decide either this is exciting, hey, this is pretty cool, or they say, forget it. I don't get it. And I don't want to get it. And so I think, you're teaching American presidents, and to me, I love history, so to me, I would love that class, all right? But I'm teaching grammar. I'm teaching, writing sentences. And I admit, and any English teacher in here is going to tell you, that's a tough row to hoe, okay? And, you only get so excited about, put the question mark, inside the quotation mark, but the period after the citation. But you kind of do it with humor. You kind of do it with, and sometimes I'll even say to them, look, gang, this is boring. I hope you come to class with a Red Bull or a good cup of coffee because, this is going to be boring. And, they respond. Students respond to this. They respond to, I think it goes back to the point of being genuine. You can't fake that. If you loved it, and I'm going to guess you love history, okay? If you don't like history and you're teaching it, the students are going to be, I feel bad for them because you've got to really love what you're doing. Otherwise, they're just going to check out. Jeff in the back.
Hey, Jeff.
Jeff?
Proud to be your colleague for the last 12 years.
Same here to you.
Sorry I came in late. I was in the wilderness with students myself. So if you mentioned this already, I apologize. I'd like to get the notes of your lecture. But I teach some Campbell as well.
Mm-hmm.
And ostensibly what the hero's journey is about is some level of transformation. It's kind of obvious how that works with students, but I'm wondering if you could think about the last 3 decades of your career as a hero's journey and sort of the transformation that you've gone through over that. So how are you different now after capturing a boon and returning than perhaps you were at your own call to adventure as a young Joe Kenyon 30 years ago?
Well, I'm much more relaxed about it. When I first started teaching, I remember sitting in the room with the door closed, going over my notes again and again and again to make sure I knew exactly what I was going to do, okay? The last time I haven't done that in a long time. Well, that's a lie. I did it in the speech. So, that was, there's a lot more nerves going up in front of the class, and do I really belong here? Am I going to damage somebody? Am I going to say something wrong and give them an impression? And then they're going to go to another class and say, well, my last professor, Kenyon, said this, and then I'm going to get a colleague come in. What's wrong with you? So there's a nerve or a fear to it. And then as some of you may not have noticed this, but I've gotten quite a bit older. And as you age, I think there's a natural mellowing. And you learn to trust yourself. And that's where the hero's journey I was talking about, the transformation, that you do trust yourself. And then when students throw a question at you, and I use that example because even though I think I have transformed, that 205 class was a year ago. And it shocked me. It worried me. Oh my gosh, am I not as open as I think I am when I just blew that question? So the transformation happens if you're paying attention to it. And I think one of the things I love about teaching in the English department here is that the vast majority, if not everybody in this department, thinks about it. And they are good teachers, and they think about when they come out of a class, oh, did I do that well? Did I do it not? I just saw one colleague last week chase a student down. I thought she was going to tackle the student because she realized there was something else she could have said that made it a little bit better. And I think that's that kind of dedication that I see among the colleagues. And I'm not disparaging anybody outside the English department. We just don't, English department, you don't get out very much. But I think we're all doing that. We all pay attention, and therefore we do transform. But it was not an easy journey nor a short journey, and I don't believe it's anywhere near being over, until I drop over. Any questions? No? Zaire?
Yeah, thank you. Honestly, you know what I'm saying, this has been one of the most empowering speeches I've ever heard.
Thank you.
Can we give this man another round of applause?
Thank you.
Honestly, throughout my years of schooling, I've never felt you know what I'm saying, just the engagement and how you treat students is essential. And what I got from this speech, just to say something, I think this applies to all aspects of life. If you truly don't love it, then what are you doing? And yeah, I just want to say, you are definitely a mogul. You are definitely a dope man. For real.
Thank you. Thank you. But you said that, and that's an important thing. I feel heartsick when a student says to me, I really don't want to be in computers, but it's where the money is, and I can get a job there. What would you like to do? Well, I'd like to be an artist. I'm really a good drawer. Why don't you take art class? There's no money in it. I need to earn a living. And I just feel sick to my stomach at that. You can't go 30, 40. Believe me, my father had a saying that I never forgot. And he'd say to me, you're going to be working for 40 years. You better like it. Okay? And so, that kind of thing, I would say to students, that's it. And if we don't love it, then we have no business being here, because we're in a people business. And if you got to like it, because, and I can guarantee it, I really take that as a great compliment, because I think if this lecture stunk, you'd tell me. This is Philly, right? Okay? And I would expect that. Sorry.
So throughout the whole, questions part of this, I've basically been hearing you say, it's better for teachers to be more personal with your students and whatnot. Now, I don't know what happens when you guys, go to school for teaching, but if you guys get some type of training or some type of crash course or something, do you think that should be taught? Because you can always tell how long a teacher's been teaching for. If they just got in the classroom, they're looking, stiff and reading off their notes, and you can hear it from other students because they say, okay, that teacher, he'll put you to sleep, or that teacher, I'll take that class because they actually care about it. So do you feel as though teachers should be taught to, I guess, be less professional and more personal with their students, or do you think, it just comes with experience?
Well, there are two answers to that. First of all, students need to remember that we're people too. And that even though I know it doesn't seem like it, I'm fond of telling the story of I remember a student, this was when I was in Michigan, crossing the street because the student gave me a very weird look, like, what's this guy doing outside of the school? And I don't know how to handle it. So cross the street rather than having to talk to me because they didn't know how to interact with me outside of the college. So, and I hear that. We can have bad days. We could be just starting out. We could suddenly maybe a class didn't go, meaning there weren't enough students, and we got tossed into this other class we hadn't taught in 10 years, and so now we're a little tentative. And that's not the student's fault. That's us. We need to rise to that. But I think that teachers have different degrees of comfort, and I'm not sure you can teach that. However, the second part of your question you can be personable with your students. You should be. But there's always a line. There's got to be that line. Because at the end, you're the one giving the grades. Okay? The students are earning them. Hopefully you're not giving them. But there's a point where the classroom can be a place where everybody should feel comfortable and should feel wanted and should feel engaged, and your opinion is welcome. But there's still that line. And that's something I think a lot of us struggle with too, because here it was when I first came here. I came from a college where the line, I mean, it wasn't a line, it was a brick wall. You stood there, your students were there, you taught the class, you left. Okay? I knew nothing about my students' lives. I knew nothing about them because that wasn't the culture of that college. I come here and suddenly, we're talking about things that are somewhat personal, or those things come up, and students expect a little bit different here. And so you have to give that. At the same time, you can't cross the line. And I think sometimes what students might see if a teacher is seems a little cold or a little standoffish, it might be because that professor might not know where the line is. And I'd rather be on this side of it than the wrong side of it. Because then once you step over that line, there's no going back. And it can be a problem. So we should all cut each other a little slack. But you're right. I think also education, teacher training is so important. I have a BS in ed and then a master's in English. And I can tell you that education degree helped me a lot in a lot of ways at that level. Another one. Follow up. People should feel free to get food, by the way.
About your last question, agreed. But I do have another question.
Mm-hmm.
So about halfway through your lecture, you said, back in the day, people could make a fine living without going to college, and then now it's not like that. I have my own opinion on that, but I'm really curious to hear about what you and the rest of the teachers have to say about that. Do you think college is really necessary for all fields now, especially something as creative as writing or art or other fields like that? Because we all hear stories of people, going out, no college, and even if they're not like a savant at it, they're still fairly good and they can make a good living off of it. So how important do you feel college is for all fields, let alone the creative ones?
Well, in the portfolio development class that I'm teaching, there's a group of writers. So I tell them there's two paths. You can go the MFA route, or you can go the life route. The MFA route is important because they meet contacts, they get to work with working writers, they get to see how it's done, some of the tips of the trade. A colleague of mine who used to teach writing here before retiring explained it this way. I could have gotten exactly where I was without an MFA. It just would have taken me 30 or more years. So it cuts down that time. I think the answer to your question isn't something the teachers can answer. I think it answers inside the person. Certainly, I don't think college should be the only thing writers, artists, other people can do. Get out there and live a little, move a little bit, go find other places. But I don't believe, I believe it can help you, but you have to be inclined to that. And I think that's probably the ending point of this. It's about what we are all inclined to do. But there are, times have changed. Students don't have a whole lot of choices to make a living wage without a college education today. That's a tough thing to do. Yes? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sam.